If Canada were to welcome just 20,000 investors at a 1.5 million Canadian at-risk investment level, we'd be injecting $30 billion annually into our economy.
We can't just accept an investment without really thinking about what's going to be done with this investment, where it's going to be invested, also where it's coming from, what are the alignments.
All that potential $30 billion, we want to inject it in innovation. It's just scary that all venture capital investment in Canada in 2024 was about $7.8 billion. This is from Canada Venture Capital Association. It's only $8 billion investment that we're putting in innovation. $8 billion, it's nothing. And you know why I'm calling it scary? Here's why it's scary. Because if you compare our economy to the United States, US economy is 10 times bigger than our economy, but their VC investment is 47 times bigger than us. So no wonder US is this magnet of entrepreneurial and investment activity, and Canada, we just remain the stepping stone.
Canada can position itself well as an alternative to the US.
How many individuals do you think we can target?
Depends a little bit on how it's structured, whether people will get the money back, how they see that. I think right now with the talk around the Trump Gold Card, one of the things is that it's unclear whether it's a donation or whether it's an investment. And that will make a big difference.
I'm glad that you invite me to criticize as a Canadian, as an immigrant that came into the country. There's something that doesn't sit in well of just having very rich people around the world pay $2 million to become a Canadian citizen and have absolutely no strings attached.
One of the things I've enjoyed about this conversation today too is that it's not just this knee-jerk reaction, you shouldn't pay to play and that's bad. It's really grappling with the realities and the challenges and the complexities of this and thinking about, well, actually there's more going on. And are there real possibilities to open up and thinking about this space as well?
Hello and welcome to another Catalyst Canada Roundtable. Today we're honored to host two globally prominent scholars whose work intersects with international mobility, rights and governance, topics central to the future of Canada's economic immigration system. Professor Kristin Surak and Professor Miriam Cohen. Kristin is Associate Professor of Political Sociology at London School of Economics and a leading global voice on the politics of mobility. Her research on elite mobility, international migration, nationalism, and Japanese politics has been translated into over a dozen languages and published in top academic journals. Kristin is the author of the seminal book, The Golden Passport, and also writes for popular outlets like The Guardian, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, and regularly appears as a commentator on global media, including BBC and Bloomberg TV. Kristin's career spans prestigious research and teaching positions at institutions like Princeton, NYU, and the University of Cambridge, and she has advised multiple governments and EU institutions on mobility and migration policy. Miriam is Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in Human Rights and International Reparative Justice at the University of Montreal's Faculty of Law. She is the award-winning author of Realizing Reparative Justice for International Crimes from Cambridge University Press. Miriam brings a rare blend of academic and field experience, having worked at the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. She's also the founder of Human Rights and International Justice Lab, which has secured a grant from Canada's Foundation for Innovation for the creation of digital research infrastructure. Miriam actively advises governments, NGOs, and courts on complex questions of international and public law. As always, a full introduction would take much more time than we have, so we encourage you to visit our website for links to their work and follow their continued contributions. Kristin, Miriam, thank you very, very much both for being here and for your outstanding contributions to humanity's understanding about itself. Personally, I've been eagerly looking forward to this roundtable, not just for the expertise of our guests, but because I believe today's discussion will help us better understand the substantive and normative foundations of what we are trying to achieve at the Business Immigration Committee of the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association. As always, allow me to begin with a proposition. Canada must rethink its economic immigration framework and prioritize attracting entrepreneurs and investors who can help us achieve our economic objectives faster and better. To put this in perspective, Imagine the potential of a passive investment program if Canada were to welcome just 20,000 investors at a 1.5 million Canadian at-risk investment level. We'd be injecting $30 billion annually into our economy. Now, $30 billion may not sound transformative when we compare it to Canada's 2024 GDP of $2.2 trillion. But consider this, it's 5 times the annual budget of our immigration department. It's 4 times the total venture capital invested in Canadian businesses in 2024, 15 times the funding we dedicated to SHRED program, which is our flagship R&D program, and at least twice the size of the entire National Affordable Housing Fund. And we're in the midst of a housing crisis. So if managed well, and if we do it right, $30 billion could solve a lot of problems. Now, if I were to put on my product designer hat and draw on the invaluable market insights provided by Professor Surak's body of work, I'd argue Canada is uniquely positioned to design a program that could dominate the RBI market. The demand is clearly there, and consider that UAE issued 250,000 golden visas by the end of 2023, and the market is enormous. And while I'd love for us to focus on product design and how Canada can win this race, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. And that's the controversy that surrounds RBI programs in particular, and economic immigration more broadly. Is RBI really selling residency? Is there something normatively or morally wrong with RBIs or even CBIs? These questions lead us to even broader ones. If we accept that immigration should serve our economic interest, then is there truly a moral difference between paying your way in for the passive investor, building your way in for the entrepreneur, or working your way in for the skilled worker? And ultimately, what is the core purpose of immigration? What are we solving for here? We traditionally open our roundtables in alphabetical order, but as Professor Surak is our international guest, I think Canadian hospitality calls for us to begin with her. So Kristin, what are your thoughts on this proposition?
Which one? You covered a lot of ground in that very wide-ranging introduction.
You have full discretion to address whichever you want. You're the international guest joining us from Cambridge at 8 p.m. So you have full control over how you want to lead this conversation.
Well, it's interesting to be talking about this with the Canadian audience, and especially since Canada in many ways has been, from the very early days of investment migration per se, a real leader in the field from that point of view of the international market. So, of course, a lot of the current scene can be traced back to some of the patterns that one saw with the FIIP, the Federal Immigrant Investor Program, which really coalesced in the late 1980s, kind of coming out of the 1976 business investor visa, and took on a particular form across the 1990s, very much interlinked with the development of Vancouver, and people in Hong Kong being very concerned about what would happen when Hong Kong reverted back to China. So it's also in Canada, it's a very interesting story about the role of Quebec and the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program, the role of federalism within Canada, and a very complex story about also how banks were involved in vetting applicants, bringing them in, and that selection process and all of that. So when the FIIP was rolled back in the 2010s, leaving only the Quebec program, which then was frozen for a while, and moving back in, this had major ramifications, not only in Canada, but globally. So in thinking about Canada's positioning and how these programs could work and how these programs might work productively, I mean, you were talking about in some ways, the potential positive economic impact in terms of the investment that can come in, and that a lot of that comes down to how a program is structured, how it's channeled. A place like Canada will see demand no matter what, which is not true of a lot of places in the world. So in a sense, it gives the government more leeway in terms of structuring and making channeling the investments in the revenue in a way that investors might not necessarily go for in the first place, simply because they will want to be in Canada and have a toehold in Canada. But it also brings up, as you were describing, for this question of, is it fair when people get to pay to play? What are the other concerns that can come up with these programs as well? So it's interesting, and I think very important to engage these with a Canadian audience in Canada at this point in time, and also at a point in time that is a very big inflection point in looking at this wider field. So if we're looking at residence by investment programs. Currently, nearly 60 countries plus 5 territories have these sorts of programs. They're found all over the world in a huge range of cases. And as you described, places like the UAE, right now the UAE is the largest issuer of golden visas in the world. It's a mixed category. It also includes talent visas and CEO visas and that sort of things. So in a sense, it's a little bit different than what people are talking about when they, look at the FIIP or QIIP or the US CB5. But if we look at this global scene, we also have to remember that there's an enormous amount of diversity there. So some years, for example, Malaysia has approved more residence by investment visas than all of the EU countries. There's very interesting South-South stories. There's very interesting changes in globalization that go on within the space that often don't get a lot of coverage. So thinking about this vis-a-vis Canada, and I'll just say this because kind of laying some groundwork for a wider discussion, both thinking about the role of Canada historically in this global scene, but also what is that global scene today, or what is that global scene in a place where, of course, south of the border, you've got Donald Trump, who's been doing a lot of moves and making a lot of changes. You've got, across the Atlantic, you've got the European Court of Justice, which just ruled that Malta's citizenship by investment program is illegal. So there's been a lot of changes globally in this space too that have significant ramifications. Now there's, quote unquote, Armageddon Americans or US citizens who are suddenly looking to think of their options as well, in which case Canada could be a place where they might want to go. But for Canadians, that's a very complicated migration stream as well, thinking about allowing more US citizens in. So I'll just, kind of add that to the pot in terms of the topics that we might want to cover.
Thank you very much. And I'll hand it to Miriam. What are your thoughts? Because basically, Kristin just validated the assumption that we had. Canada, if we choose to play again, we have a very good position, and we can play that position in our advantage. But I want to go back to that elephant. Is this selling residency? Is this commodification of citizenship? Is this something morally wrong with it? Miriam, what are your thoughts on that particular topic?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Kristin and Tia, for the questions. I think that's important to mention. I think it's a good start to say, Canada has, if it wants, it can bring a lot of investment, immigration. But leaving the question at that, I think is problematic. I mean, we have to look at the core purpose of immigration, right? Like if we go back to the basics, just immigration in general, we have economic imperatives. Historically, immigration has been linked to, for example, labor market needs, demographic sustainability, even fiscal health, but also it builds the Canadian identity, and it builds the fabric that keeps together the country. So in the business stream, for example, it's often framed as attracting capital, talent, and entrepreneurship, but it's not the only stream that exists. And as I mentioned, it's not just about how much capital we can bring to the country. I fully agree with you on how much we could raise the GDP of Canada and what could be done with investment, and we don't even need that many investor immigrants, but we have to kind of go a little bit deeper, I think, in terms of what we want to achieve and what are the core purpose of immigration. So going to the point that I mentioned about nation building and identity, immigration inevitably builds and defines a nation's identity, the values, the global roles that nation wants to play. So Canada historically has used immigration not only to fuel growth, but also to shape the multicultural society that it is, and with that comes the shared citizenship. And the citizenship that will come after the sort of stream of giving permanent residency that can potentially become Canadian citizenship comes with rights, but also obligations. And I think, if we look historically at the investment immigration programs that we had in Canada, perhaps that's the part that is kind of the piece of the puzzle that is kind of missing, is that commitment to a civic duty and being part of of the nation. I also think we should look at short-term versus long-term goals. And that's where, if we look at just the economic advantage of investment migration, that might seem like a very positive short-term goal. So for example, if we want to address skill shortages, attract investment for specific projects, but more long-term goals would require us to reflect on creating cohesive, inclusive communities and really think about what we want these new potential citizens to be in the country. I do pause for this idea of, global equality or inequality, the providing citizenship and an entry to a country that has a lot to offer to those that can pay their way in. And I also think that obviously we're discussing the Canadian example, but I'm very happy to be sharing this roundtable with such a renowned expert on global migration and mobility, because I think we can't just think about the Canadian perspective. We also have to think about globally, the impact that this type of program can have. And perhaps it's just my own perspective, but in the literature, there's a lot of discussion on brain drain, getting people to come to countries that can provide a lot of advantages and can pay their way in, and leaving their countries of origin with this whole idea of brain drain. I mean, I think if I can kind of summarize before we get to the next point, I guess a narrow economic lens misses the broader social identity structure of Canadian society. We have to think about policy that includes the economic and investment and in terms of how much investment Canada can attract, but also that could respond to other needs, right? And the other needs are not just capital needs. It could be labor needs, but also pluralistic commitments that we have in Canada regarding the way Canada is as a nation. So like looking at different provinces and disparities and needs that might exist amongst different provinces is one way to think about what policies we should be discussing for investment migration. I think I'm not saying that it could never be justified, and I don't think anyone is saying that, or like you mentioned as an elephant in the room. We have to look at it as what Canadian citizenship is and should mean for people that are coming into Canada through an investment, through basically this idea of a transaction, an economic transaction, and what are they bringing into the country more than their investment. So maybe I'll stop here for now and see.
No, thank you very, very much. These are very good points, which I want to put before Kristin. This interplay of identity and how we select immigrants. I mean, the broader issue is, why are we doing immigration? Is it nation building, or is it just go after the economy? Because historically speaking in Canada, it was the economy. It currently is the economy. 60% of all of our immigration intake is from economic classes. Something about 22 to 24% are family reunions. So if you're a Canadian or if you're a permanent resident, we allow you to sponsor family. And then 16 to 18% are refugees. So 60%, we're doing it for the economy. And if we're doing this for the economy, and the byproduct, as Miriam is pointing out, is how it shapes our identity, I want to kind of do a deep dive in your research, when we're targeting investors, right? Because you're telling us in your body of work what they're after, right? They're after a better life, they're after mobility, sometimes they're after plan B. With that profile of a prospective investor immigrant, what can we expect our identity, how can we expect our bigger Canadian identity be shaped by that subclass?
Yeah, it's a great set of questions, and the ones that Miriam was bringing up too, this question of what does this mean for us as a nation is a really important set of questions. It's interesting in thinking about the broader space, because this isn't true of all countries. So if you look at, say, the citizenship by investment programs, where you invest in a country, you become a citizen, most of the times those are microstates. They're small islands. People aren't necessarily going there. They're interested in the rights that citizenship gets you outside of the country. And it can even be things, even looking at, say, the Portuguese Golden Visa program, their residence by investment programs. A lot of that is plan B planning. You spend a little bit of time there. You might enjoy holidaying there, but there's still not a lot of participants who are really picking up sticks and making a one-way move to Portugal. Canada, though, is something different in that. Canada, the US, Australia, these are places where people start thinking about, I want to put my kids in schools. I want to have this as a second base. I want to, really spend time there in many cases. So those questions of what does this mean for a nation become very significant in real ways. And this can also be a population of people who, depending, and it is a diversified population of people who are interested in these things. Traditionally, it's been new wealth from places outside of the North Atlantic who are looking for better mobility, looking for a better quality of life, looking to diversify their options. Now there has been a rise of people from North America and Europe who are looking for similar things as well, to be honest. But that's a slightly different profile too. So this question of what does it mean for us, I think, is a really important one to consider, especially in a place like Canada, which has seen, in the past, large amounts of investor migrants coming in through the FIIP, often going for particular places, going for particular lifestyles. It can also be, very often if people have big businesses elsewhere, it will be, the person running the business, stereotypically the male breadwinner within the family, who's still abroad, and you have got satellite kind of family members in the new place and very complex family relationships around that as well. And so there can be this question of, well, are you really, becoming a part of us or not, or where do you see yourself to? So I think these are, as particularly in the Canadian case, really relevant questions alongside the question of what if people don't come, which is, it's interesting because in some of the microstates I study that sell citizenship, the fact that people don't come is in some ways a good thing, because it would be pretty destabilizing if you have a country of 50,000 people and you're selling several thousand, making several thousand new citizens a year. You don't want to, it could be very threatening for locals in that sense. So, it could also be a question for Canada. Do we want to be giving people residence and a potential pathway to citizenship if they're not throwing their lot in with the country and just seeing this as a plan B or an insurance policy as well, which is an interesting provocation too, or to think about. I mean, what I think is important in this space is to think about the bigger issues.
Okay, so I guess one of the bigger issues that is in our act is integration for us is important. And if we want to simplify integration, is we want you to be here and grow roots. We're a multicultural nation, so we don't really prefer what kind of a dominant culture we want to have, as long as you are here and you're growing your roots. So if I were to leverage program design into giving me the objectives that I want for integration, Miriam, would you think it's a good idea if I give points to investors that have children? Or alternatively, what do I do with the language requirement? Because Kristin made the example of Portugal. Portugal used to have a language test requirement. Now they're saying we don't need your test, just take a course and show me you took the course and we accept that. What are your thoughts, Miriam, on how we can engineer design into giving us the output that we want in terms of the longer integration goal?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good but also complex question. I think before we can answer this question, I think we have to reflect on what are the goals for immigration more generally, like I said before, but specifically a program of investment immigration. So not the broader economic immigration category, but immigration by investment, right? So if the goal is very candidly, purely the capital, then how can we make that, integrate into into Canadian society and make sure that the immigrant will integrate, right? So not necessarily having children will solve that question, and I think it might even pose other kind of puzzles, right? So are we, treating immigrants differently that have or that do not have children and so forth? So I see perhaps other sets of questions that can come. But for example, one way to integrate is like tangible business activity. So where the investment is going to go in terms of creating jobs or new companies, or for example, underfunded sectors that Canada might need the funding. And then again, it's not just a matter of injecting capital there, but generally you can also kind of couple the capital with the intellectual capital as well, right? Or the experience of the investor. So is there a way that you can engage the immigrant that is coming with a huge amount of capital, but that also has potentially a lot of intellectual experience that it can bring to a certain in underfunded sector? So I think that the kind of pre-question to all of this discussion of how to better integrate or make sure that the investor immigrant will participate in Canadian life is, what are we really looking for, right? So yes, for sure, the capital, it comes with the category, but also how to use this capital and what we expect from the immigrant would be, I think, an important question. So we can think about it as presence in the country. That could be one way, but also not necessarily presence would, equate to integration, right? So equate to participating kind of in Canadian life and so forth. So perhaps going a bit further than, these very objective criteria of, presence for a certain number of days or the language requirement. I understand the language requirement is an interesting factor because, it's, if you don't speak the language, then it might be more complex to kind of integrate and contribute to Canadian society. So it might be a little bit more automatic to be kind of like, okay, it's a transaction. I paid for my residency that can become a citizenship, or I paid for my citizenship and that's the transaction. So the language requirement is an interesting one, and I think it was present in different iterations. And specifically, if we look at Quebec as well, it's an important part of the history and the culture of the province as well. So, for example, immigrants that wouldn't speak French perhaps would be something to flag specifically in regards to immigrants that go into Quebec. But I think the moral legitimacy of the investment program would depend on this reciprocity, and that has been, my argument in the work that I've done in this field, looking kind of historically the different programs that have existed in Canada, and I think the reciprocity here is, what are the ways that we're expecting individuals that come in as investment immigrants to give back to Canada. And once we settle on that, then I think we can form the criteria for the immigration. And the important point is not to just look. We've mentioned that already in a few of our discussions. Not to look at just the economics, right? Like how much money do we need? Do we want? But rather, smart money, as often people say. That I think that's an important point as well. So startup programs that are kind of starting companies or investing in startup companies, I think are one way that we can think about sort of this idea of smart money. Historically, the flaws of previous programs are in the way that they're kind of very passive. I mean, there were a lot of perhaps more logistical or procedural aspects of delays and things like that. But the offer of permanent residency in exchange for minimal economic or even social civic engagement, I think, was probably part of some of the flaws of previous programs that a new reinvented model should address more head on.
Perfect. There were a lot to unpack, a lot. And I think these are all fascinating points that we really need to discuss. One of the things is, okay, what do I expect from this immigrant subclass? Are you a passive investor, or do I want you to be an entrepreneur? We divide them. Because we had an economist on our in a previous roundtable who told us about the Tim Bergen rule. It says, one policy objective, one policy instrument for one policy objective. So if you kind of want to get two outcomes with one policy, you often can expect to fail. And the Quebec story is a fascinating example of that. Like, I'm trying to get a passive investor, but I want them to have business experience. And then I want them to know the language. Then I want them to do this value test. And no wonder that program is not popular and it's underused. Right now, that Canada doesn't have any other alternative passive investment program. The Quebec program is not popular and is not used. And when Canada had other programs, we had this competition. And Quebec became the stepping stone. So people went to Quebec because they allowed for an investor program and then came out of Quebec. And that was a big problem for it. So Kristin, do you agree that is it a good idea to match different policy outcomes to expect from a passive investor, or is it better just to have separate streams? Like, you're an active entrepreneur, you start a visa, and then you're a passive investor.
Yeah, I agree that you really have to have separate programs in order for it to really work. In my experience in looking at these programs globally, if you have a passive investment program versus an entrepreneurial one and they're similarly priced, people go with passive. In part, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Even for business people, part of it is unless they really know the place and unless they really know the market, they're going to be a bit wary about really getting involved in doing an active investment. In those cases, they'd rather just put their money in and not have to worry about it. But it does make for a very different sort of question of logistics and question of what is being given back to the country, depending on what's relevant there. So, first off, and I thought what Miriam was saying was also very important, that when people, in thinking really about what business people want or how they operate, it's good to be also potentially more flexible in recognizing that contributions might not just be in spending 183 days in a country every year, but it can also be in other forms of giving back or knowledge transfer and those sorts of things. So if one wants to develop a program along these lines, you also have to think about what are ways that allow business people in particular to continue to run international business lives while also recognizing that many of them, some of them would just be like, put in my money and go on it and not care. But a lot of them actually, they're human beings and they do get an interest in a place and they will ask about what can I give back or what can I invest or how can I do more. And if they become a part of it, they also, in some way or another, care about the future of the country because they become tied up into it. And so understanding that kind of point of view where they're coming from, but also coming at them with, well, this is what we expect from you, is, I think, the place to go. So if you're thinking about entrepreneurial or passive, people will go to passive the moment they can do it. Do you have any real estate option? People will jump into real estate because they know it and they see it safe and all of that. That can have longer term effects, of course, on local housing. And, you have to sort out whether you want that or not. Canada, though, has a lot to offer. So, Canada will still have people who are interested if you don't have a real estate option. What will happen if you have an entrepreneurial program? People around it will try to push it into a more passive entrepreneurial program rather than more active entrepreneurial program, simply because it's easier. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all people will say, I've got no interest in Canada. They often will. And I think also because Canada has a lot to offer, especially in terms of school and quality of life, then they become personally invested too, which is a different thing from just knowing the language. It's also seeing the wider scene. So it'll be interesting to see which way it goes. I've talked to a lot of people in this industry, so I have a sense of how that industry thinks and how they make profits and what people want. But what Canada wants can be slightly different, but it has a lot that it can, figure out in terms of its own positioning if it decides to build this sort of program. And it's got a lot to learn from its own past and now from a lot of other countries who are doing it in terms of the way it can be structured.
I can give you some information from what's happening on the ground when we don't appreciate the fact that we need to have separate streams that are designed carefully so we don't have people who are trying to fit in where they do not belong. For example, Canadian Start a Visa program by design is something that expects the entrepreneur to be active. And now if you do a simple Google search about Canada Start a Visa program, it's being sold as an RBI, as a passive investment program. And a lot of market is dominated by that misuse, right? If you want to be a passive investor, the name is there. I'm not expecting you to engage in business activity actively on a day-to-day. I have a separate program for that. And usually you're absolutely right there, Kristin. If I do the same price, nobody wants to jump through the fire hoops of an entrepreneurial program. For example, the Ontario one, we had one. The instruction for it was like 95 pages. People would just lost their mind when they were reading what kind of, all these checks that they have to do, what kind of a business you have to run, eligibility, ineligibility, eligible expenses or whatnot. We definitely need to think about that. So what we have gathered so far in our roundtables, we figured we need to have a passive investor class at, let's say, $1.5 million to $2 million. That's up for debate. We need more research, and you certainly can help us there. Then we need a class for entrepreneurs, and we don't necessarily want them to, hey, you don't have to bring me the next Facebook. Just come and buy a mom and pop shop business in Canada, because we have a succession tsunami coming, right? Our baby boomers are retiring, and trillions of business assets are at the risk of destruction because there are no successors. So that's a real issue. So one class for the passive investor, one class for the entrepreneur, and one class for what we call the genius, the top talent. Oh, you have the next Facebook? Okay, you are the startup, so I'm gonna, have higher requirements for you to prove that you are the kind of genius that I allow you to come to Canada with less capital requirements. So essentially, we're playing with how much capital I want from you, the prospective immigrant, how I want you to invest it, and what kind of reporting I expect from you. If you're a genius, very little capital requirement, but you need to show me that you have support in Canada. If you're an entrepreneur, instead of 1.5 million, just bring in $500,000. You don't want to touch anything. You want to be an astronaut. You want to bring your family here. You still want to be the breadwinner in China, in Iran, in wherever you are, until Canada grows on you and you say, hey, my family is there, I want to go back. So this is our construct, how we think about this. And I want to go to Miriam. What do you think about what we have gathered so far? If you were to just criticize us, like, what do you think we have wrong in what we have? And then I'll come back to Kristin with the same question.
So I'm glad that you invite me to criticize. I think it's an important part of the discussion as well. So look, what I think right now is very much what Kristin was saying. We have to look at the value of Canada as a country, right? It's a country that has a lot to offer, and I think the starting point should be that we can't take the past failures that have had different reasons, but I think none of them relate to how good the country is and how valuable having a Canadian passport and citizenship is. And we now have also the possibility to look at different programs that exist worldwide and why do they exist for the reasons that they exist, and what are their successes and what are their potential flaws. So like just as an anecdotal example, Nauru, you've seen the program of golden passports and investment migration and so forth, and the criticism there, or the kind of note of caution, if you want, is you have to make sure that you're not allowing for criminal activity and so forth, and learning from different experiences in the world. So starting from that position of like, we have, you know, a good, something good to offer, and we can learn from not only our past, but also what has worked and hasn't worked in other countries. I think that should be kind of the starting point for whatever paths. I mean, I understand your point on having different paths, and you know, structurally, I think it makes a lot of sense that that you don't kind of put everything together in one pot. I do wonder what Kristin was saying about, well, but if we have a path that it's just, especially the values that you're mentioning, you know, $1.5–2 million, like that, a lot of people will go to that path. And to me, as a Canadian, as you know, as an immigrant that came into the country, there's something that doesn't sit in well of, you know, just having very rich people around the world pay $2 million to become a Canadian citizen and have absolutely no strings attached. And I do understand having that one path and that the objective is gathering the capital, but I do wonder if that will become the kind of sole path that is preferred. And the potential there is like, okay, maybe if you raise the investment, so I guess we're talking very practical kind of criteria, but if you raise the investment, then you're also kind of closing a little bit the gap there, right? Like then you just don't have as many people that would just kind of be able to prefer a certain passive path if they don't have that capital. But I mean, I have some ideas in mind. Like, for example, we can't just think about what the investor is going to bring kind of from a government perspective, but the public perception is also an important part of it as well. So the public benefit lens, right? So essentially what we do with the investment, so you have the part of the investor brings in the money, and then the government has to kind of say what it will do with that investment. And then that's the kind of public benefit lens that we can take. So taking that investment, so leaving aside what this individual will bring into the country, but you know, looking at what the country can do with this investment, then prioritizing sectors that are aligned with some areas of national interest. I don't know, aging population. Everyone talks about technology, artificial intelligence, but also the climate, net zero, and so forth. There's also the idea of having sort of the ethical criteria that will also play into the public perception. So maybe even the different pathways, the passive investment, we should also look at requiring kind of due diligence source of funds and alignment with certain human rights norms. So again, I guess the critical hat here is you know, asking me to say, you know, money has to come in with some obligations as well, right? We can't just accept an investment without really thinking about what's going to be done with this investment, where it's going to be invested, also where it's coming from, what are the alignments, like do we want any kind of investment when we talk about just amount? So you mentioned $1.5–2 million. Does it matter what the source of that investment is? So does it matter if it's coming from investors that have made their fortune in less than ideal scenarios, right? And does it matter if it's, you know, somebody that had a startup in a huge technology boom or in something that is innovative, right? So I think that's another point that I wanted to mention. I think I wanted to just go back to the idea of real estate that was mentioned by you and Kristin as well, and I do pause as well about real estate roots. We have seen what investment in real estate has done to kind of different parts of Canadian society, and I think you know, it's also an easy route, right? Like if you allow people to make an investment on real estate and that will grant them citizenship or permanent residency, it's a very simple and kind of in terms of investment, maybe also a secure investment to make. You purchase real estate and then you can acquire residency or citizenship. But what will that do to the Canadians that are living here in Canadian society? And the real estate market is an important point to mention as well.
100%. Real estate is a big one, and Kristin has touched upon this in one of her research. I have it here. I'm not sure which paper, but you did a research here regarding the largest residency by investment programs in the EU. Portugal, Spain, and Greece, investment migration sales account for less than 3% of real estate transactions. And then somewhere else, you make that caveat about Greece, that a lot of transactions were there. But in Canada, we have this. Evidence and research-wise, we have the amazing work of Professor Wendy Sukier at the Toronto Metropolitan University, which did this work, and they concluded that the effect of immigrant population on housing prices is just a modest 0.1% to 1.6%. So it's more like, hey, we're making it big for the press. The policymaker is failing with affordability and says, hey, who am I going to blame? Immigrants. I can't blame all immigrants. The easiest target would be rich immigrants. So the real estate factor, it's based on the research that we have, is really a non-player. But if we want to get this investment money and pour it into real estate, that's a whole different ballgame. We're not proposing that. As a matter of fact, we're saying all that money, all that potential $30 billion, we want to inject it in innovation. It's scary. It's just scary that all venture capital investment in Canada in 2024 was about $7.8 billion. This is from CVCA, Canada Venture Capital Association. It's only $8 billion investment that we're putting in innovation. $8 billion, it's nothing. If you compare it, and you know why I'm calling it scary? Here's why it's scary. Because if you compare our economy to the United States, US economy is 10 times bigger than our economy, but their VC investment is 47 times bigger than us. So no wonder US is this magnet of entrepreneurial and investment activity, and Canada, we just remain the stepping stone, right? Like personal experience. I graduated engineering U of T, 90% of my classes in Silicon Valley, not in Canada working. So we're just a stepping stone. They got the OSAP, they got the government fund, they got a fabulous education, and then who's getting the fruit? So what we're proposing here is like, let's play the immigration angle, because for a lot of people, just being able to live in our country is a big privilege. So let's find a win-win situation. So let's not treat the passive investor. Due diligence is definitely a must. Like, we don't want to turn this into, a haven for the criminals. And Kristin, you did fabulous work on this, because you did a report of Beyond FATF. You kind of were responding. I'm going to let you touch on that, please. I don't want to keep on talking, but I'm just overexcited here. So due diligence is one thing that you did work on. So can you please tell us about that and how you responded to FATF concerns in that paper you did?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've been working on this space for over a decade now, and I was sort of initially interested in, because, it's kind of like, oh my God, these countries are selling citizenship. And then I started to look at the way it works on the ground, and I realized there was so much more than just criminals and money launderers and all that the media would pick up on, that it's really a complicated scene. And you can really unpack a lot about globalization and how that happens by understanding it. And you realize that, for a lot of people in the world, it's about dealing with the fact that they were born in a particular country with very limited options. And, they've done well within that. But the fact that, if you're born in a place with passport privilege, and, as many of your listeners, who are Canadian, I've got a pretty good passport. I've got two now. You take it for granted in a way that a lot of people who have that lived reality of, waiting in line for a visa, getting a single entry visa, and, it's tough. So thinking about, I'm trying to think of where, so that was how I became initially interested in it, and kind of breaking apart, realizing that it's actually much more complicated. Now, a lot of people still think that they want to hear that story about how it's all criminals and money launderers. And I was going to give a paper at a conference that was focused on anti-money laundering things. So I thought, okay, I'll do a global, analysis and try to really look at the risks here. But that also means looking at the definitions that they were using, where it's like, put your money in pay to play. That means actually there's a lot of different visas that you can qualify for just based on having the money. And then let's look at the risks and the real problems that have been around these things as well. And let's look at the range between, legal documents and gray market documents and black market documents, and, looking at that wider space rather than just saying that investment migration is bad. What is that wider space of real risk? And you find that actually it's all sorts of other channels are much riskier than these. Not to say that there's never any problems, but that's where, as you were mentioning, due diligence is really important. You want to, and Canada does have the capacity to do that very well, making sure that the source of wealth is the type of source of wealth, as Miriam was saying, that you want to have coming into Canada, making sure that those background checks are there and that's all done correctly.
I think we lost Kristin.
I think what's interesting thinking too about these different, investment amounts, as you were saying, a higher amount for the passive investment, lower amounts for the more active investments. That definitely makes a lot of sense. And even at the amounts you were describing, 1.5 million to 2 million, if you look at similar programs, say in Australia, New Zealand, I mean, the UK was even £2 million, for the Tier 1 investor visa. These are programs that at that price point would bring in about a couple hundred applications per year. So we're not even talking about really big numbers. But if you're talking about a 2 million Canadian investment amount for, say 500 applications, 500 families per year, maybe 1,000 families per year, that is significant. So it's interesting, that risk is much lower in terms of potential bad apples coming through when you have smaller amounts but higher investment amounts. So, Canada has a lot of possibilities for thinking about this. I think the biggest challenge for Canada is the fact there's a Trump administration south of the border right now, and the US is the country with the largest number of millionaires. So it's also this question, because I also hear this from Canadian friends, that one of the most difficult immigrant groups to deal with are the Americans. And so it could be this question of, does Canada want a bunch of Americans coming into the program? Maybe it's okay, but it's an interesting population to think about in terms of, because they will probably, be more interested in staying and putting down roots and doing those sorts of things, but it's a different sort of migration stream as well. So I think, in terms of constructing the program, that the point you made about directing the investment, Canada has enough draw points that it can put a lot of restrictions and people will still want to come. And in terms of using the programs to develop the economy, that's great. It's a great position to be in, and there will be demand. But I think the real question is, do you want the Americans? Maybe they're all right.
That depends on how we look at it. You call it No. You call it as a challenge, but I call it as the opportunity, right? If people, because US, and the way that Canada has been overshadowed by US has very, very serious implication of our national identity, and that itself is a topic on its own. Like how the Canadian identity has been shaped and formed by this giant south of the border, and it's just a crazy interplay there. So do we want the Americas? Honestly, one way the Canadians define themselves, and Miriam, please jump in whenever you want. One of the ways that we define ourselves is that we're not American. So that tells you a lot about Canadian identity and how we perceive it, and the interplay between this America-Canada, right? So that's one thing if we want to focus on the American target, but unfortunately we don't have anything that would fit their purpose. Like right now, as we stand right now, there's the Quebec program that, because of the language requirement, the education requirement, the business ownership requirement, is not a popular program. And we have the Startup Visa program. And even if you want to misuse the Startup Visa program and come as a passive investor or come as a regular entrepreneur, not necessarily an innovative entrepreneur, we make you wait in line for 40 months. So we blame it on this this confusion at policymaking level, and we're a civil society association of lawyers, and we want to help. And that's why we're bringing you fabulous people to this table to say, hey, let's walk towards reducing this confusion and come up with something that is workable, so we're not left behind. Because I think Canada is left behind in this market, and we have to do something about that. So Miriam, because this then again goes back to the question that you're saying, what is it that Canada wants? And with us, with immigration, because this is, then again, I want to go broad. What is it that we want with immigration? Do we accept this is the economy? And if it is the economy, then the passive investor and the entrepreneur are fundamental parts of them. And if we want to do it, we have to do it based on the reality of the market. So if I want to come up with an investment program that is not marketable, because people have options, right? I'm going to give you one example. We did this venture capital pilot program, which Miriam touches upon that. You study actually in your research paper, the one that puts you on our radar, Miriam. That program required you to have a minimum net worth of $10 million and put a $2 million at-risk investment. It attracted 2 people. Why? We root cause that analysis is because your money was managed by BDC and nobody cared. And that government entity, nobody really believed in their capability or their governance strategy into actually giving the investor some return. But look at Portugal. Portugal says, come bring me your money, but you get to invest it in the stock market, but I give you a portfolio option. As long as I'm not sure if it's 60% or 70% investment in Portuguese company, you can do with your money as you wish. So it's a win-win. Portugal businesses get money, passive investor has options. They can talk to different, portfolio managers, they can talk to different financial advisors, and they can do, they can at least do the best they can with their money. So if we put this lens on that we have to do it, and if we have to do it, we have to do it based on market condition. Miriam, where do you think, what kind of compromises do you think we can make in a passive investment program? Because I think that's the most controversial. The passive investment program is the most controversial. Entrepreneurs, poor people, they work day and night, right? They work day and night to do that business, to run that business. Passive investment is that, and I agree with Miriam, it kind of it doesn't feel well, it doesn't sit in well, but I can't really point my fingers, and that's why I'm asking you this. Okay, $2 million, you come to Canada, relatively no strings attached, because I still want you to fill in your residency requirements, your this or your that. So where do you think that compromise can come from, or how does that compromise look like?
Yeah, no, so it's a good point, and I think I'll touch on two ideas. So the first one is what I've already mentioned, which is the public confidence, right, on the program. So we can't forget that, yes, we'll build the program that the government will run and so forth, but it's bringing people into a country with other residents and citizens and the diversity that exists. So I think that idea of public confidence is important, and it's not just a communications issue in the sense of how the program is presented in the public eye, but it's much more of a design issue, right? So it should be structured in a way that not only the people in the field see the value, as we've been discussing, the 3 of us, we see the value of even the passive investment migration, but that the general population also see the value added of bringing passive investment to the country. And then my second point is what we've already been discussing, why do we want the money, right? Why do we want investment? What are the areas that we want to see grow with this investment? Is it, it can't just be an investment for the sake of an investment. So as you mentioned before, incentivizing entrepreneurship, maybe mentorship, engagement with already what we have as Canadians, ecosystems economically, but also the ones that are lacking, right? So that I mentioned, what are the main areas? So maybe an investment that would, target those areas that are important for growing Canada's economy more broadly beyond the actual value of the investment. I think that would lead into more public support and potentially also just more long-term feasibility of the program. I completely agree with you that the previous program, because the problem is this: we start from the idea of like, well, there's something not quite right with passive investment, so we have to put in criteria so that we try to make it right. But then the issue is, what are the criteria that we're putting? This idea of net worth, like what is this criterion adding to the equation? Like that the person has a net worth of millions of dollars. What does that bring in terms of Canada's prosperity and what we've been discussing in terms of innovation and the future generations that will run the economy and the businesses and so forth? So putting a few criteria, even though it's a passive investment and it doesn't need to be completely no strings attached, as you just mentioned, but adding some not unsurmountable criteria, but the criteria that would have some weight, I think would be beneficial for the economy, but also for this public confidence and public general interest in support in the program.
Well, that's perfect. I put that question to Kristin. What do you think are good criteria that we can put for a passive investment program? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
To keep people in, or to have some sort of bigger commitment. So I think what I was also thinking, and when Miriam is speaking as well, and those are all points I would absolutely agree about on. What's interesting too is, so Canada's talking about residence by investments, not citizenship. And typically, and I would think this would be the case with Canada as well, if you sell the investment, you lose the visa. There's a couple of countries where you can get automatic permanent residence as soon as you make the investment. But my guess is that's not what's happening. So one should remember that in the first place. If people want to naturalize and become Canadian citizens, probably standard Canadian citizenship requirements would kick in, which requires substantial physical presence, substantial amounts of time, presumably language. As well, etc. So we're still talking about
3 years and 5 years.
3 years and 5 years, and I suppose English or French language as well, and this sort of thing. So
yes, if you're
yeah. So
at
when
citizenship, sorry, I just wanted to say that at citizenship level, language requirement kicks in. If you're in a certain age, at citizenship level, we want you to take a test, but it's lower than the one that we admit you. If, for example, start a visa, if it's the benchmark, we want you CLB5, but at citizenship, it's lower. So it will kick in at citizenship level.
Okay. So there's already, in thinking about a person becoming a member of Canada as a full citizen, there will already be those, expectations of, greater commitment than if it's simply a visa. In terms of what sort of commitment you want for a passive investor program, I mean, there's different ways you can think about it. A lot of countries are looking at Portugal right now in terms of its model, which is about, 1 to 2 weeks, minimum of 1 to 2 weeks every year in the country. My guess, and that's kind of in contrast to these places where you don't have to be there at all. My guess, though, is Canada could go higher if you want that. It depends on the numbers, but also keeping in mind that if you say a minimum of 183 days, depending on the person's business involvement, that could be more challenging, even though they could be very committed to Canada. It's just simply the nature of international business can make that difficult. I think also what could be interesting in terms of commitment is, and it becomes more difficult to assess, but it depends on the type of business investment you want to do.
What were you thinking that would become difficult to assess?
Anything like, say, cultural
because
ties,
we were saying,
philanthropy. For example, you could say you have a minimum philanthropy requirement every year.
So that's how we directed. So that's how we do. That's how we direct the money. One thing that we were thinking about is venture capital philanthropy, which is a new venture capital format. So we can direct the money into that, but that's how we use the money. In terms of what we want from you, the prospective passive investor, one thing that we're offering, before Canada did guaranteed, and that was a flaw. Because our investment before was guaranteed, people didn't bring in the full investment amount.
No, it's financed.
They financed it.
Yeah.
They financed it. So it kind of reduced the economic impact, right? We're saying, no, we do not want to do guaranteed. We want to do at risk. But hey, we want a win-win situation. We don't want you to think that you donated the money to Canada. We want you to do your own due diligence and decide where to put the money. But we, Canada, we tell you where you can put the money. For, let's say, clean energy is one way, and we tell you these are the venture capitals, these are the stock portfolio in green. These are what you can do in let's say, deep tech. Then there is this area of AI. There's so many things that we can do. So how we direct your money, but it's at risk. Deployment, we were thinking give you permanent residency upon deployment of the capital, but the capital will be locked for 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
So that way, if the PR, so you get PR when you pay, and if you want to take it out, you can't because the capital is locked in. You signed a contract.
What happens
so that way,
if something comes up?
What happens? Place. Like you can't.
Yeah, that's a good question. What happens if a person commits a crime? Do they get the money back or do they lose it?
If they commit a crime,
like say they commit a crime,
the money
or they
can
lose
be there,
the visa.
But do we prosecute them for the crime?
Okay, but say they do something that means that they would lose the visa. Is the money still locked away, or do they get it back?
No, I think let's give them the privilege of just having the money. We just don't give them the citizenship because the law, how it's set, is we have health requirements and also, of course, we have good behavior requirements. So if you commit a criminal offense and if it falls within a range, then you kind of like become inadmissible. So we can revoke your permanent residency and you lose your chance to citizenship. But so if you committed a crime, I mean, we can attach it to the term, but I think it's onerous, right? Like, I mean, say, okay, your money is there, you can take your money, but you're inadmissible to Canada. Okay. Just when the term finishes, give us a destination account, we'll send you your money, but sorry, you're a criminal, PR is revoked. That makes sense?
Yeah. So one thing you could do is
what about language
Miriam's
requirement?
Point, adults. Successful adults, that's tricky. Chinese speakers, Arabic speakers.
Sorry, I think we lost. I think I have you with delay. Miriam, can you see Kristin properly? Oh, you're back on right now. I think my feed had a problem. Okay, you were going to a Miriam's point. That's the last thing I heard.
Let's see. So, I think when you were saying about language, I think it's tricky with adults. That's a hard one.
Very tricky.
The kids will be fine. Adults are harder. And these are busy people too. So
Miriam.
Yeah, sorry. I wasn't sure if
it just got mixed up. Yeah, the lag was there. Kristin was talking about language requirement and how difficult it is for the adults. I want to turn it to you. Do you think, like, how much compromise can we have there on language requirement, knowing that a minimum language requirement will kick in at citizenship level, but when we want to grant PR, Miriam, how important do you think requiring a language requirement there is, and if it is important, at what level? I'm just going to give you the context. A startup visa requires CLB5. So do you think, and it's like basic to intermediary English or French. What are your thoughts on requiring a language requirement by proof of test?
Yeah, so I agree with Kristin that it's very tricky with investor and with the adult investors, right? And again, we go back to the point, as a country, we have a lot to offer. So it's not like we're in a bad starting position, but then at some point also the requirements have to be realistic, right? So, if we're looking at the passive investment, then we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense that we require a very high level of the language if the whole idea is to have a passive investment? So I think, no level of knowledge of any of the official languages of the country would be problematic, of course. You want somebody who can, read basic documents, even with the technology that we have, that, it doesn't seem like, a lot of the things that humans do can now be done by technology. But putting that kind of discussion aside, I think as a minimum, an understanding, a basic understanding. But we have to look at the language requirement with the category, right? So going back to the discussions of the different paths, and if we're still focusing on the passive investor, that passive investor is not somebody that we're going to be asking to, run a business in the country and participate in society fully. I stand by the points that I made before, that I think there should be some sort of integration, but requiring a very high level of language ability might shy away some people that for other requirements would be very interested to come and would be a potentially good passive investor, right? So I think the focus in the past has been, maybe we should look at this in a kind of evolutionary way, historical way, where we see what has been the focus in the past and why have the programs not worked in the past, or what have been their weaknesses, if we want. And language has seemed to be, has been one of the criteria that was kind of continuously there. And I tend to think that there are, in the society that we live today, other things that we should be thinking more about, like I mentioned already, public confidence and transparency and the due diligence, and where the investment, where is the money coming from and where it's going to be put into the country. Like, so as Sia was saying, basically, what are the different areas that we want to develop that then we fuel with the investment that is coming in. So again, if we start making a grocery list of all the different requirements, then yes, we're starting from a very good position. We have a lot to offer, but then it becomes a very cumbersome, as we've seen with past. So I think we have to think about this deeply in a way that, yes, stay true to Canadian values and identity and what the investor will bring to Canada, but also, there are other programs out there, and we have to, if we want to do this in a serious manner, then we have to not add an entire, grocery massive list of requirements that might not match the objectives that we have. So in summary, I think a basic level of the language seems to be kind of a condition sine qua non, but a very high level for a passive investor doesn't seem to match any specific purpose of the program.
Okay, that's perfect. And Kristin, I just want to put one question on the design of the passive investment program. What do you think is the realistic goal? Because what you're saying in 2 million is like 200 families. Right now, we're targeting 20,000 a year. And how we came up with that number is, okay, the 250,000 of the UAE 2023 may be an anomaly because there are different classes. We don't know if the 250,000 actually paid the $1 million because, as you said, different categories. But then again, I want to go back to your research. You're estimating the annual size of passive investors at 50,000. So if it's 50,000, how reason? And EB5 is 10,000. Yeah, no, 50,000 global, 250,000 for the individuals, yes.
So the U.S. is 10,000
How many individuals do you think we can target?
Because what you want,
US
we have
EB5
to count
is about 10,000.
10,000 individuals, but it's about 3,000 applications because they count the family members. That means it's 3,000.
So the family size kicks in. Okay.
Yeah. So it's 3,000 investors. 3,500 investors, 10,000 individuals.
So what do you think is a reasonable number, just a ballpark, like what comes to your mind right now? What is a reasonable number? If we want to run a pilot for Canada, how many do you think we can go after if it's at 1.5 million Canadian, which is about 1.1 million?
It's like the demand curve. If you were to charge 10 million, it would be much lower, but could you get more at 5 million and all of that? So the US can get more at a lower, at a higher price point, in part because the economy is so big. But, the US is looking less desirable to a lot of people these days, and Canada doesn't have the one thing that the US offers in terms of global taxation on your wealth, which is, a big concern for investors too. So, Canada can position itself well as an alternative to the US, but it's still not going to see the same sort of numbers as the US. Australia, also desirable. It's further away, but that, they had a higher price point too. but it was a couple hundred people per year. New Zealand also pretty high price point, a couple hundred people per year in the millions. UK at £2 million, and a lot of people want to be in London. They want to put their kids in English private schools, British private schools. They were doing, about 500 to 600. They had a big bump to over 1,000 one year, right before they doubled the price point, but otherwise it was pretty small. So at a 2 million price point, I think it'd be low thousands. In terms of applications submitted, I
Low
don't think you're going to get
thousands.
20.
And that's
Yeah, I don't
okay.
think
That's great. That's
I
great.
don't
So
think you're
low
going to get
thousands, like
20,000
3,000, 4,000 applicants. Okay.
potential.
Okay.
Yeah,
But 3,000, 4,000. Okay. So
yeah.
that's
It
instead of
depends
the
a little
30
bit on how it's
billion, then we have.
structured, whether people will get the money back, how they see that. I think right now with the talk around the Trump Gold Card, one of the things is that it's unclear whether it's a donation or whether it's an investment, and that will make a big difference if he raises that to 5
Yeah,
million.
that's one of the problems with the EB5. And that's a big problem with EB5. And that goes to what Miriam is saying, public confidence. Like with the EB5 and the way the money it goes there, oftentimes the investor considers the money gone. And it's a lot of abuse. But if Canada can build that public confidence, not only internally with the Canadian population by showing them transparently where the money is directed, and also build that public confidence with the prospective passive investor that, hey, this is the option that you have. So you can actually count on on getting a return on your investment. This is your absolute right, get a return on your investment.
Yeah. So things like add in, something like you also need to do a 50,000 Canadian donation to a philanthropic organization in your area every year. Something like that kind of keeps it going. Maybe there's a possibility of divesting, but if you have something like donate to schools, that also helps people see what the impact is locally, and will want to see that coming in.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I love it.
That.
You know why? Because I can tie it to what they're getting from the investor. Like, let's say if their portfolio is performing better than the interest rate, for example, we're brainstorming here. Like if their portfolio is performing better than the bank rate, like this much gift to charity.
Yeah.
This much gift to philanthropic causes. That's perfect.
Below annual
that's a great
fee,
idea. Thank you very much.
to them. Yeah.
Yeah, but the annual fee is kind of different, like charging them a gas fee, for example, right? Like you're here, you have to pay regardless of how you're performing. Because one thing that is very, very unfortunately terrible about the Canadian immigration system is we look at immigrants as numbers. Like we don't take them as people with real ambitions and with real problems and real challenges, right? It's like I cannot begin to tell either of you how well Miriam may have an experience with dealing with the immigration system, but Canada's immigration system just treats you as an immigrant very, very, very poorly. So if we can just add in some improvements that kind of grant you the integrity that you deserve as a human, let alone as an investor with hard-earned money. Like we established, due diligence is going to be there. So if you're coming to me, you earned your money. So if I give you that integrity, and if I give you the option, and I've give you the framework within which you can exercise some sort of an agency, I think I'm already surpassing a lot of other programs, mainly the US, because the US immigration system is not really different in how it treats people than the Canadian immigration system. So I have a leverage in terms of customer service, in terms of client care, with better design and with better administration. I can actually win some very, very good points.
Yeah, keep the process smooth. Smooth and predictable.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. Well, ladies, thank you very, very much indeed. We are at the 1 hour and 20 minutes mark. If I can, I just had one other thing. I just wanted to go back to that normative argument. If you have a few more minutes to spare. You okay, Miriam?
Sure.
Okay. This what puzzles me citizenship is a construct, right? It's a construct based on borders drawn arbitrarily and usually after bloodshed. So this idea of having citizenship and then making it into a very, very exclusionary and big deal is a mental question for me. And I want to bring it down to what we're discussing here in terms of if there is something normatively wrong with having money buying residency, how much is it really different from asking people to show us their skills? So my specific question is this. Even if we accept citizenship is a good thing, is not, because I'm an open border person, right? Let's say we're pragmatic. Citizenship there's a reality. Is there any, really, and I'll start with Kristin, is there a difference between how we should look at a passive investor, an entrepreneur, and a skilled worker?
So all countries screen.
In terms of the moral legitimacy of selection criteria for passive investor, entrepreneur, skilled worker, are they really different? Or
this is a better question for Miriam. She works in the space working in human rights.
So let's put it to Miriam. Sure. So let's put it to Miriam, and then Miriam, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I could follow up, but this is Miriam's space.
Yeah, so I think to me, the big question is what we started this meeting with, which is, the passive investor. All of these categories that you've mentioned, they have kind of the entry fee, right? It either be an investment, or a skill, and so forth. But the exclusionary part of it is one point that makes me pause, which essentially allows people that were not looking beyond the money to come in. But more important than that, because you could say, well, but also people that have a certain skill, then you're excluding those that don't have that skill. I think more important than that is the contribution, right, to the country. And I think that to me is what makes me, like I said from the beginning, not be against an investment. I understand the benefits. I think it just has to be done in a way that, gathers public support, that is transparent, that is used for the benefit of the whole country and the prosperity of the whole country. But the problem is, if we look at passive investment as like really this transaction, then there is a problem, I think, with equality and with giving equal chances and with what individuals will bring to the country. And that's where I think there's a huge distinction between paying for residency that will eventually lead to citizenship if other criteria are met, and bringing a skill that will benefit the country, so skilled worker, or starting a business that will then benefit the country. But if we again look at all the discussions we've had and all the different criteria that we thought that might work better, then that is a little less pronounced, I think, because then we're looking at it as passive, but it's, in a way, it's not as passive, because you're using the investment to foster economic growth and innovation, and then we discussed as well the idea that when it comes to becoming a citizen, then there's a few other criteria that will just apply by way of the law. So that, I think, those are the two main points, is that I think it's much more exclusionary, like the money versus to get into a country, than having a skill or being able to come in for other reasons. And then secondly, and more importantly, what happens after, right? Is just I get in and then I have no other value that I can add to the country rather than my investment, which is not the case for skilled workers. And then perhaps I should just say one more thing as well, which ties back to discussions we've had, and a point that I made in the beginning of our talk, which is we have to look at why we're doing this, right? It's not just about bringing money in. Why do we want investments? And if we look at the why, what purpose does this type of immigration serve, then we might, be more at ease with passive investment. So, for example, if we have a need to advance a certain area of the economy, and it's with this investment that this area will be advanced, then, there's perhaps a similar objective than getting skilled workers in, for example, technology, which is the very easy example to give, because we have a need, we don't have enough innovation and so forth. We want to invest in innovation. So what are the two potential ways? You bring in money, you invest in companies that are doing that type of activity, and you bring in people that can continue to bolster. So then you're kind of going in the same direction, but it needs those pins that are not there yet, that were not there, I think, previously, right? So if we think about those factors, then I think there's progress that is made.
Kristin, what do you think? Because the way I understand Miriam, it says, if there is no need, there is something more valuable about sweat than money. And I agree. What do you think?
Well, and I say this in part as a sociologist rather than a legal scholar. So one of the things in asking about, well, what do I think about the moral questions, is my instinct as a sociologist is to study it. What is it about legitimacy? What is it about, if we think about the world, all countries screen. Even if you want open borders, as you might, be, kind of feel in your heart, this is how the world should be. All countries screen. And there's been a transformation over time in terms of what is considered a legitimate principle for screening. 100 years ago, blatantly racist, screening mechanisms were common and quite open. And, now there can still be racialized forms of exclusion, but those are generally less front forward in terms of how they operate, et cetera. So all countries screen, and considered legitimate principles of screening these days is, usually economics, so labor, skill, and family. Family unification, as you were saying before, Canada's about, 60% economics, 20% family, and 20% refugee. Or roughly something along those lines. And if we look at the economic side of it too, very often in terms of the way sociologists think about the world, it's kind of economic capital, so money, gets converted into other forms of capital, like human capital, your skills. So for example, I moved from the US to the UK, but I was able to do it pretty easily because I'm from a wealthy country, I had a good education, I have a PhD, and I converted that into a job in the UK. But a lot of that is because I happen to have been lucky enough to have been born where I was born, and, to be educated as I was. And so there was behind that kind of a conversion of economic capital into these other forms of human capital. So for me as a sociologist in studying that, it's sort of thinking about how do those wider systems work? And, one of the things I've enjoyed about this conversation today too is that it's not just this knee-jerk reaction, you shouldn't pay to play and that's bad. It's really grappling with the realities and the challenges and the complexities of this and thinking about, well, actually, there's more going on. And, what can, and are there real possibilities to open up and thinking about this space as well? And for me, that's been really productive.
Thank you very much. I want to put the period right here. I want to thank you both very, very much. Kristin, I know you're in the evening. You had a busy day. You made time for us. Miriam, thank you very, very much for being part of this roundtable. This the initiative of ours. This is not a podcast for the sake of having a conversation. This is a mission to get as much insight as we can to put it into something workable that can not only benefit Canada, but thousands and thousands of ambitious investors and entrepreneurs and geniuses who want to come live in this country. So I cannot thank you enough. I will just give you, if you have any final thoughts that you want to share with us, by all means. Do you want to go? Do you have let's go to Miriam for final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good initiative. So I was very happy to be part of this. As I mentioned, it's not an area that I do as much research as Kristin, but it has really caught my attention for a good portion of my research, and I've really dug quite deep into the evolution. So I'm very happy to be part of this. Thank you for the invitation, but more importantly, I think it's a great initiative to be not putting it aside and then kind of reinventing it without much thought, but rather if we decide that we need to go that path, that we get it right in a way. So I think what you're doing is is the exemplary way to kind of build a program. Gather from a lot of different perspectives from Canada, from experts abroad like Kristin. So that this has been very, very interesting, and I've learned a lot. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristin.
I absolutely agree. And it's been a real pleasure to talk seriously about the complexities around this. And to begin, today it was conversation, but to really think about what this looks like in terms of design and in concrete terms going forward is really exciting. And how to make it resilient and how to make it build a program that, of course, all policies, none of them are watertight, but to do something that is, a real success in some ways, it's kind of exciting. Or to plan that out and to really work on that. So I'm glad to have been a part of this conversation. It's great. And it's a great time to do it too, Canada.
Thank you very much.
You've
But
got
not as
another
bad
3
as I
years.
am. I just had the...
Yeah, 3.5 years to...
No, I think we have everything we want to turn this into an opportunity like never before. And I hope that we get there. Thank you again. Thanks a million. And thank you everyone for watching.